Thank you very much for giving me an opportunity to chair the session. It's wonderful. This is a special session. The title of the session is Behavior Science Informed Evolution of Law, Indian Scenario, Past, Present and Future. And the speakers are four eminent speakers, Dr. Indu Nair, who is a Senior Consultant, Mental Health Center, Trivandrum, and Dr. Anil Prabhakaran, Professor and HOD, Government Medical College, Trivandrum, who is my good friend. Indu is also my good friend. And Dr. Kiran Babu, DNB Psychiatry Resident, second year from Trivandrum, and Dr. Alisha Sulaiman, DNB Psychiatry Mental Health, Trivandrum. This is Alisha, is it? Sorry. And without delay, why not we start the session? It's an interesting topic, and we are expecting more audience. But I will join them. Or I can see here. Fine.
No, sir, you join.
Fine. You are starting. Fine. Thank you.
You have decided to sit there. Because the cameraman probably wants it.
Oh, cameraman wants it.
You want it? You want those lights?
It's okay.
So, welcome everybody. My senior colleague, Dr. Singh, and Raju, and my friends. There's a confusion regarding all these terms. Legal, ethical, moral, fair. People use it interchangeably. Let us be very clear. Morality is right versus wrong. Judgment or evaluation of action, that's a conscience. Ethics is professional. A professional behavior, the professional conduct for the benefit of the subject. Subject underlined twice. Law is for society by a government. Walk sign is for the pedestrians. If you start your vehicle, cross the line, is it immoral? Is it unethical? Illegal. Both. No, all three. So it is illegal because the law demands that you should not cross it. Ethical, supposing you are not a police officer enforcing the law, judge making a comment. If you cross, it's unethical. Maybe morality is decided upon, I am taking my grandchild to a casualty. The child is gasping. For me, it is not immoral. So we have to draw lines between what is ethical, what is illegal, and what is moral. Law and the neuroscience are definitely strange bed partners. They speak different languages. Both of them cannot understand. If you take human beings from womb to tomb, they gradually develop, they progress. So also is their brain. The brain is getting molded largely in the womb and to a very large, but lesser, but to a very large extent in the days to come. Mostly in the infancy, then in childhood, and by adolescence. When they get into an adult, probably all the brains are mature, except some part which is last to mature, is the prefrontal cortex, which is the seat for judgment. So this childhood is an important period in which we should provide an enriching environment, optimal frustration, so that they will grow to become one of the good citizens and thereby build the nation. So during the development, the nutritional, emotional, or a sexual abuse can damage the child beyond a reasonable thing. The sexual abuse during this period is like a toy under the tire of a. There are no retakes. There are no retakes in life, says Mohanlal. And that is why the POCSO Act came into being. They learn from the neuroscience that this is a period where they should not be abused, and the consequence of the abuse cannot be repaired. And the brain grows into an adolescent brain where the myelination takes place posterior-anteriorly. And the front region of the brain, prefrontal brain region, is the last thing to mature, myelinate. So they will be full of energy. The peer pressure will be more. The maturity is less. They are growing, brain is growing. Wait for a couple of years before they become adult. So if they do certain crime, they do it, the adult do it because of the higher cortex. They have thought acting as brakes. Done in low emotions like judges, that's called an adult cold cognition. But adolescent, because the higher cortex is gradually evolving, the amygdala, that's called an amygdala hijack, they will tend to express their. So the adolescent brain is a brain under construction. Wait for a couple of years. Give them optimal environment. They will become probably Mother Teresa or Albert Einstein. They are in the process of development. Or N. Raju. So we see in adult, because of high energy, low brakes, embarrassed by parents and section, the prefrontal lobe. The girls are suddenly a fascinating section. The ability to listen to extremely loud and bass sounds, have no idea. Cars. Oh, yeah, girls. So, for mens rea, for a crime, there needs to be a correct assessment by the prefrontal cortex. That is why the juvenile justice. Because, wait, don't punish them. Wait, provide them the right environment, right enriching environment. They are Albert Einstein on the path, but don't put them in prison. The immature possible error in judgment is because of the immaturity. Mature error in judgment becomes a crime. So one child was below 18 and he is to be hanged. Innocent can be reformed, but not a juvenile rapist. Hang them, hang the rapist. It is for the judiciary and the lawmakers to decide. Emotionally, they brought down the age to 16 from 18. Is the capital punishment? You are totally eliminating a person who has a brain which can be modified. The typical example which the lawmakers were informed by neuroscience is the court-ordered drug and alcohol rehabilitation. Addiction is an illness, not a crime. We don't need punishment. We need help. Treatment, not punishment. That's what neuroscience tells the lawmakers. Punishment, they are put into central lesson. By 18, the brain continues to mature. The High Court Chief Justices retire by 65. In America, the Supreme Court judges never retire. They have to voluntarily retire because they claim it keeps on myelinating and myelinating. So says MCA. MCA has put it at 70, 75. So now the central prison, the name has changed to a correctional home. Even for adults, they require correction, along with a retention as a probably as a punishment for them to evolve. We have reinforcement, both positive reinforcement, negative reinforcement, punishment, and there is the basic things. Awarded for good behavior, punishment is not encouraged because other things are shaping, modeling and correcting cognition. The correctional home, I don't think in anywhere the usual correction is. They are housed along with other antisocials and they learn so many POCSO offenders. I told about the POCSO Act and all. It is a DSM-5, ICD-11 disorder. And you want to punish them. These offenders were once victims of child abuse in the past. Nobody talks. The law never mentioned those victims of child abuse in the past. You put it in DSM-5, you put it in ICD-11, but you make it a pure crime. That's a sad part. So that needs to be stopped. The future, probably when you dissect out in future, probably things will come out. We will have finer techniques. Probably it's now the chemistry. Mohandas sir is telling about all the chemistry. I believe it is the physics. It's a physics and the neural circuits which are to be designed, modified, and to what extent we can treat them remains to be seen. Now, so far, we have to tell to the lawmakers and the judiciary that neuroscience is a thing which cannot be ignored and should be accepted. There are so many other things apart from neuroscience, but neuroscience has a say on it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Anil. At the end. I think we will have the questions and discussions at the end.
Thank you.
And Dr. Pankaj Kumar has joined me as a chairperson. Actually, he was supposed to chair the session. He was busy with another session, so he joined now, and I am extending him a warm welcome. Next is Dr. Indu. Kiran Babu. Kiran Babu, he is a DNB psychiatry resident, second year, Mental Health Center, Trivandrum. Welcome. You want to make some remarks?
Good evening to all. Myself, Dr. Kiran Babu, will be dealing with POCSO, Juvenile Justice Act and Section 377. As sir has told already about the neuroscience and behavioral aspects, let's see what POCSO is. POCSO is Protection of Children from Sexual Offences Act, which came in 2012. It was the first of its kind and aimed mainly at protecting children from sexual abuse. So why such an act came to our country? Because Rahi, it was an NGO. It conducted a study, India's first study on sexual abuse, and the findings were like this. It was alarming that 76% of the studied population were abused as a child or adolescent, and 72% of them never reported the matter to anyone. And then later India government backed a survey, and the sample was 12,500 children, and the study spanned over 13 states, and the study revealed 53% of them were sexually abused. And there was a convention on rights of children in 1989, and India signed the convention in 1992. Their motto was to prevent abuse and exploitation, and they defined child as anyone who hasn't completed age of 18 years. So India has to make such a act. And then POCSO came in 2012, and it was aimed mainly to protect children from sexual assault, sexual harassment, and child pornography. And for that, the Act directs the government to establish special courts, also to speed up the procedures. And the key points in this Act is, it's a gender neutral, and the burden of proof lies with the guilty. That is, he has to prove himself innocent, and it makes the recording and reporting of the abuse mandatory, and also the age of consensual sex was raised from 16 to 18 years. All this process, it's a child-friendly approach is taken. And coming to punishing the convict, a minimum of punishment, that is up to 3 years of imprisonment with fine, it is given for sexual harassment, and the maximum punishment is given to aggravated penetrative sexual assault. It was earlier 10 years, and in 2019 amendment, it was raised to 20 years, and maximum it can extend to death penalty for repeated offenders. So, coming to shortcomings of this Act, at present, child marriage, even though it is banned legally, it is still rampant in our country. And the Act also doesn't consider the consensual sexual acts between adolescents or adolescent with an adult. And in POCSO, it mandates examination of the female victim by a female doctor itself, which comes in conflict with CRPC 164A, which says that the government medical officer should examine the rape victim irrespective of his gender. And it doesn't address the mental status of the perpetrator. And also during punishment, the behavioral modification measures are not considered. So what we might miss out to address is the perpetrator might be having a pedophilia diagnosis, a personality disorder, or substance abuse, mood disorder, etc. All these we say not to dilute the seriousness of the crime, but treating the root cause may prevent a repeated offense. And in a study by Lipsy and Landenberger et al., they have studied many criminal offenders, and they have seen that the offenders are often having distorted cognitions, and also many often these offenders are taking a victim stance, and they justify their crime. And they have applied CBT in these criminals, and the CBT is showing promise as per their study, and it is shown to reduce the repeated offense to the extent of 20 to 30%. So to the future, we should try to bring a process where we routinely diagnose or find out who are having a mental diagnosis, treat the underlying problem, and also bring about environmental modification so that we can prevent a repeated offense. Coming to Juvenile Justice Act of 2015, similar to the POCSO, due to the India's status of signatory role in Convention on the Rights of Children in 1992, we had to amend the already present Act. We will be considering child in conflict law to this in particular presentation. To the history of the particular Act, prior to independence we had two acts, Apprentice Act and Reformatory Schools Act, and post-independence we had Probation of Offenders Act, and finally we had Juvenile Justice Act of 2000. And in wake of the Nirbhaya Act and also the increasing involvement of juveniles in heinous crimes, we had to amend this Juvenile Justice Act of 2000. And as Sir has already discussed about the child and adolescent brain, we can see that the adolescent age group, they are mostly the rebel because they are autonomy-seeking individuals, and they have the sense of omnipotence, and they are modeling the cool behaviors that they see around. And also the peer group become more important than their parents. So there's a more chance of coming in conflict with our law. So the child in conflict with law, here the burden of proof lies with the state, that the child is always innocent until proven otherwise. And the court also directs juvenile justice boards to be set up in every district, which should be one or more. And each board is a 3-membered board, and they say that child line service should be present 24 hours a day, and the board can decide. This came in wake of the Nirbhaya Act. The age group of 16 to 18 should be tried as an adult or not. since the board is including psychologists and also sociologists. They can decide whether he is tried as an adult or not. Then it follows a principle of repatriation and restoration. It just simply means that the focus of the system is not to put a blame on the individual. Rather, it follows a problem-solving approach and answers the question, finally repairing the harm being done. And there are child-friendly approach to the accused, then service to the convicted. Upon finding that the adolescent or the child is responsible for the crime, the court can direct any of the mentioned points here. That is, any offense below the age of 16 can be sent home with a warning, or counseling, community service under supervision can be recommended. Then probation, if the child is sent under the supervision of a probation officer, it should not exceed 3 years duration. Also, if he is sent to a special home, it should be maximum of 3 years duration. Also, the court can direct the child to attend a school, attend a vocational training center, attend a therapeutic center, etc., or undergo a de-addiction program if it is needed. So, let's see what are the positive aspects of this particular act. It is based on the right of the child. It is following a corrective, restorative and preventive method. It brought several departments together, and need for the psychiatric treatment is acknowledged at various points. And personality and individually adjusted vocational training and social integration is also proposed. But there are certain shortcomings. The definition of child comes in conflict with various other acts in our country. And also, individual aspect is only considered, yet the routine evaluation is not recommended in the particular act, and the effect of the environment is not discussed anywhere. That is, after correction, the child is again sent to the same environment in which he has committed the crime. And age-based separation is not at all seen in any care homes. That is, if he is kept in a care home, many other age group children are all being kept together in the same center. And this can lead to smaller children being abused, or they can model and learn new antisocial behaviors from their elders or peers. And society's, all these laws have came, but society's attitude to these future criminals remains unshaken. And personnels in the judiciary and police, they all lack training in the child development and the scope for change. The child can change, he can correct himself and be a better citizen or individual. Those aspects are not seen. And these neglect and torture, this can mold the child into a criminal. So the need of routine evaluation is emphasized in these given studies. And in most of the studies, almost 70% of this criminal juvenile offenders, they have positive mental health psychiatric diagnosis. And the disruptive disorder like conduct disorder and impulse control disorders are seen as maximum, followed by substance abuse. So to the future, we need a better system where psychiatric evaluation is routinely done for a child coming in conflict with the law, to early diagnose these conditions and giving him a chance to change. Coming to section 377, it is a section in our IPC which criminalized homosexuality, and following rigorous legal battle only, this act was taken away from our IPC, and the court acknowledged that sexual orientation is a natural process and people have no control over it. This comes in par with our understanding about human sexuality. How this verdict came? It was initially challenged by ABVA in 1991, then by an NGO named NAS Foundation. They challenged the constitutionality of this act, and following rigorous legal battle, in September 2018, it was scraped off from our constitution. So why it is important? Because according to National Crime Records Bureau, as of 2015, 1,500 people were arrested under this section, which included minors and even women. And around the world also, the same trend is seen. That is, homosexuality was punishable by death in 12 countries as of 2016. Even though the law came, even after 1 year, there is no legal provision for same-sex marriages or adoption for this community. In this news clipping, shows two gay couple, but their marriages are not legally recognized by our system. And discrimination at jobs, education and at homes, it's still going on in our country. And even healthcare professionals are being accused of discriminating this community because of the thought that homosexuality is crime or an abnormality. So to the future, we need a better sex education, and concepts like biologically assigned sex, gender identity, sexual orientation, gender role, these should be made aware of to the public. At least healthcare professionals should be thorough with these concepts. To conclude, there is definitely a positive change in our society, and we have still miles to go. And judiciary is considering psychiatric needs of the victims at least. And a positive change in the direction of a restorative approach. That is, criminals should be given a chance to change. And it is a need, and it should not just end up in paper. Thank you.
Thank you. We will take up the questions at the end. Dr. Indu.
Respected seniors and my dear friends, at the outset, let me thank the organizers for this opportunity. Without much ado, let me go to my part of the presentation. So I am mainly dealing with the NDPSA, the Protection of Women from Domestic Violence Act, and the rape and loss which are related to it. We are actually following a life cycle approach. So we are now in the young adult, the adolescent and the young adult part. Sir already mentioned about the neuroscience aspect of the NDPSA. This is an act, the prelude of the act, that is its purpose. It was mainly the control of substances of abuse, the use, the manufacture, the distribution, the trade, the cultivation, and many other things. And the ban that is based on this particular act, there is a ban on almost 300 psychoactive substances. And this is an act which was amended so many times. It was amended 3 times mainly, and there are many rules which are still, there are bills which are pending in the parliament, like the 2016 and the 2018 bills. This particular act evolved from the Opium Acts of 1857 and the Opium Act of 1878. Then the Dangerous Drugs Act of 1830, the Drugs and Cosmetics Act of 1940. Now this slide, even though a little crowded, you can actually see the main substances which are involved. Oh, this won't be showing anymore here. The main substances which are involved, the punishments in a nutshell. That is the punishment for the small quantities as well as for the commercial quantities. It has got, that is the older act, the 1985 act has 6 chapters and 83 sections, but you can see that one section, just one section defines an addict. You know that most of these drug peddlers are addicts, hardcore addicts. And there is one section, section 39, 2 parts of this particular section which gives provisions for de-addiction and release of the offender. When you look into the details of those sections, you can see that when any addict is found guilty of an offense punishable under section 27, which means the small quantities, the court, instead of sentencing him at once to any imprisonment, with his consent, he can be released for undergoing medical treatment for detoxification or de-addiction. So that is the provision which is given by the law. And the person can go undergoing this treatment for a period not exceeding 1 year. That is this one section that says. Now section 39(2) says that suppose the person successfully completes the treatment, then he can be released, he or she can be released after due admonition, entering into a bond with or without sureties for abstaining from commission of offense for a further period extending up to 3 years. So this is what the law is providing. Now, when you look at the major amendment which happened in 2014, there were many amendments, but this was one particular amendment which mentioned many things. That is, like the death sentence for repeated offenders was diluted. increased penalties were given for the low offenses, like the arrest for small quantities was raised from 6 months to 1 year. So even in this amendment, you can see that the management of the drug-dependent cases and the rules for the treatment facilities is just a meager mention. So this was that particular amendment of section 71, which says that it's just a change in the structure of the sentence, as you can see. That is, the government may, in its discretion, establish as many centers as it thinks fit for identification and treatment. It was just rephrased. The government may establish, recognize, or approve as many centers as it thinks fit for identification, treatment, and management. So the need was addressed, the need was understood, but there was no elaboration on it. It was just a meager mention. There were many criticisms of this particular act of 1985 and even its amendments, saying that the hard and the soft drugs were treated the same. Same punishment was given for all the drugs. That the maximum fine is very low. That is, we know that maximum fine is just 3 lakh rupees when compared to the American, the counterpart punishment, which is almost 40 lakh rupees for the same punishments. And there was always the angst of that some of the softer drugs like cannabis should be legalized. We know that we were acting upon the US laws, and then finally now in US they have legalized cannabis in most of the states, and as an overreaction to a scare by the US. And then the important questions like why alcohol is excluded from the purview of this act. The illicit drugs like alcohol and tobacco. Tobacco has got a separate law, but alcohol is excluded. And we know that the prevalence of alcohol dependence is very huge. Legislative control of alcohol, is it an unmet need? That is a big question remaining. Back home in Kerala, I come from a state which has arguably the highest per capita consumption of liquor in the country. You can see the figures, that is the tipplers of South India. And even many of the suicides are related to alcohol and the drug intoxication. And Kerala stands very high in that figure also. We have a small mission called the Vimukti mission by the Kerala Excise Department. That is, they are spending part of the revenue which they get by selling alcohol to divert it to the de-addiction centers, to services like the de-addiction centers, the counseling centers, the anti-drug clubs. They have different campaigns also, like marathons, short film competitions. So my question is this a small model which can be generalized on a larger scale in coming amendments of the NDPS Act? When you look at the brain, Sir has already mentioned about the science of addiction. How can we have laws to just punish them when they are already slaves of their addictions? So we should think again. And what about the future? I would like to draw your attention to this forensic mental health law reform which is happening in Japan. It happened in Japan. They have shifted from the criminal warehouses to broad spectrum specialist services. So isn't it time that we are also providing for large scale treatment of addicts, including the funding and sources? That should also be mentioned. Now going on to my next topic, which is the Protection of Women from Domestic Violence Act. This is one of the newer, one of the other legislations which has happened recently. There were many pro-women's legislations even before this 2005, starting with the Maternity Benefit Act of 1861. We have the Dowry Prohibition Act of 1961, which is actually a great, big mockery. And coming to the National Commission for Women, 1990. Don't forget to think about the 498A IPC, which largely deals with domestic violence. But we know about the bad experiences meted out while implementing this particular act, this particular section of the IPC. So this is in a nutshell what the main key points of this Protection of Women from Domestic Violence Act. It is a law to protect women in every relation, not just marital relations, but even live-in relations. It is considered as a secular law. That is, it is both a civil as well as a criminal law. That is, it talks about compensation and it also talks about the punishments meted. It gives a wider inclusive definition of domestic violence. That is, it describes domestic violence, a very comprehensive description of physical, emotional, mental, psychological, economic, and verbal. All aspects of abuse are considered in this particular definition. It has got a strong implementation mechanism, definitely, because new posts like protection officers and also a list of service providers, everything is mentioned in the Act. Easy access to justice, even doctors who are treating victims of domestic violence, even we can lodge a complaint. So no longer like the older times. And it is mainly victim driven. So these were the attractions of the Act, but there were different critiques of this Act also. What they say is, too many rights and reliefs without practical assessment. The ground realities are not considered. Over-empowering authorities naturally means there is a possibility of misuse. As you can see in many of the divorce cases, what is being projected is this law, this particular section is being projected more and more. Reaction of the government to international pressure, again as you can see in all the other laws. When it became very pro-women, what happened was it became anti-men also. It promotes intolerance in marriage, and we don't consider that small number of men, possible men who are being subjected to domestic violence, that also was ignored. The impact of domestic violence on women, we are all familiar with the multitude of physical and the mental health issues which happen in these women, including PTSD, depression, suicidality, etc. For them, what does this law have to offer? It is just one section, section 11, which says that a provision for the victim to be given mandatory counseling with the abuser. The contradiction is that counseling for innocent party can and should only be voluntary. It can never be mandatory. And suppose you give a mandatory counseling with the abuser, it can often end in convincing her to adjust to the situation. That is all the law had to offer. What about the respondents in this particular? We have different studies which look into the mental health problems in these men who are arrested for domestic violence. But this was one area which was neglected in this particular act. We never looked into the mental health problems in these men. We should know that these people are having access 1, access 2 disorders, especially the antisocial and the borderline personality disorders. And they also exhibit different mechanisms like hyperarousal, impulsivity, and emotional dysregulation, which actually make them vulnerable for repetition of their crimes also. In US and other countries where they have included, that is while implementing this particular law, they have included batterer intervention programs, batterer intervention and prevention programs. And these programs, they have incorporated different models like the Duluth model. Duluth is mainly a Minnesota-based model, it's essentially a psychoeducational program. And CBT model, which is more of a therapeutic model. Both these models have shown good evidence in preventing recidivism. So when we look into the future of this particular act in India, changes to address the major criticisms of the act should be done. And there should be provisions for assessment and management of psychopathology in the victims and the perpetrators. If not just copying a batterer intervention program, why not have something akin to it along with the trial and the term? And also making available qualified counselors in the service provider list. We know who all will be sitting there as counselors nowadays. So at least think of that qualified list of counselors. Now finally going on to the legal aspects of rape, which is the hottest topic nowadays. And being in India, we are actually at a very vulnerable point in that India is one of the countries with highest incidence of rapes. It actually tops the list along with the US and Brazil, which are other countries which are having high rape incidence. And the worrying statistics is that there was a rapid rise in rape from 2012 to 2014, and after that we have been maintaining that high plateau. And you can see some of the states which have got high rape incidence, and coming from Kerala, it is also another state which is having moderately high. Now this is the one section, section 375 of IPC, which mainly defines rape. It defines rape as mainly a vaginal penetration. It is defined as a penetration of the vagina. The man is said to commit rape in the following situations. You're all familiar with it. The 6 situations: against her will, without her consent, with her consent, got by threatening harm on a person of interest, with consent, not her, pretending to be her husband, with consent but in intoxicated state or on an unsound-minded person, with or without consent below 18 years. But still, this does not define, this particular section does not define about marital rape. After February 3rd of 2013, that is post Nirbhaya, there was an extensive revision of the definition of rape. Rape is not just penetration of the penetration with the penis, but inserting objects, manipulating any part of the body, applying the mouth, etc., that the definition itself has elaborated a lot, and the different situations, one more situation has been added, that is unable to communicate the consent. You know, when you look into the punishments, what are the main, the section 376 deals with the punishments. They have been made more stringent, that is 376A to E. If you leave the victim in a persistent vegetative state, rigorous imprisonment of 20 years or till the end of life, or even death penalty. If it is gang rape, same as this. In most extreme cases, death penalty is being meted out. What we are hearing recently. And you have to pay compensation. The perpetrator has to pay compensation for treatment and for the rehabilitation of the victim. And all government and privately run hospitals have to give free first aid and free treatment to the rape victims. These are all strictly being mentioned. But marital rape is not a crime even after the 2013 reform. So what about the mental status of these women? Small relief is that forced sex is prosecutable according to sections 498A IPC and also the Protection of Women Against Domestic Violence Act 2005. We know about the health impacts of rape on the victim. This is just a small list. Actually, there are the number even may, the conditions may even include cardiac disease in some of the recent studies. I don't have time to go into the details of the psyche of the rapist, but this was one enlistment of the different types of rapists. When you look at least 2 and 4, you can see that these people are having really serious mental health problems. That is the specialized rapists who are sexually aroused by violent sex and the high mating effort men, the psychopaths. The law is silent regarding the management of such issues. So what is the future? You can actually divide it into the individual approaches, the community-based approaches, and legal and policy reforms. At the individual level, you have to consider both the victim as well as the perpetrator. For the victim, you can offer counseling, therapy, support groups, and the perpetrators should also have support services, life skills training, and actually developmental approaches which should start from childhood onwards. And community-based approaches can think about prevention programs and community activism by men. There are different programs which actually we can emulate. There are good programs in Africa and some other countries. And legal and policy reforms, that is, the law should be refined further. Reporting and handling of rape cases, that is, the victim being asked to describe again and again about the particular event, that all should go away. And there should be more legal reforms. So that is what I have to say at the end. Thank you all for your patient listening. I hope something went across to all of you. Thank you.
Thank you. The last speaker, Dr. Alicia.
Good evening, one and all, respected seniors. My part of the presentation today is Behavior Science Informed Evolution of Law, Mental Health Care Act 2017. Regarding mental health acts of India, it can be broadly divided into the pre-independence phase and the post-independence phase. And the act of pre-independence phase include 1858 Indian Lunatic Asylum Act and 1912 Indian Lunacy Act. And post-independence, there was a 1987 Mental Health Act and the present 2017 Mental Health Care Act. Regarding the Mental Health Act of 1987, It consisted of 10 chapters, 98 sections, and it spanned over a period of 1993 to 2018. But now, even after the introduction of Mental Health Care Act of 2017, looking back, ANCIPS have not been implemented in majority of the states of India. And what changed from the previous Indian Lunacy Act? There was a change in terminologies, lunatic to mentally ill, asylum to psychiatric hospital. So what led to the new act? Convention on Rights of Persons with Disability was passed by the United Nations in 2006 and it was signed and ratified by India in 2007. This gave India two options, either to bring amendments to the previous act or introduce another act to fill the lacunae and to go in par with the CRPD 2006. So India had to introduce Mental Health Care Act of 2017 and Rights of Persons with Disability Act of 2016. Now moving on to Mental Health Care Act of 2017. It was passed in 2017 but came into effect only from May 29, 2018. It was to provide for mental health care and services for persons with mental illness. And the objective of the act was to protect, promote and fulfill rights of such persons during delivery of mental health care and services and for matters connected therewith. Mental Health Care Act of 2017 has 16 chapters and 126 sections. And the crux of this act is chapter 5, which deals with rights of persons with mental illness. Other changes in the act were Advanced Directive, Central Mental Health Authority, State Mental Health Authority, chapter regarding offences and penalties and mental health establishments. These are to name few. So what's new in Mental Health Care Act 2017 compared to the previous Mental Health Act of 1987? There was introduction of Advanced Directive, capacity to make mental health care and treatment decisions, nominated representative, rights of persons with mental illness, introduction of mental health establishment and mental health care review board. The major crux of Mental Health Care Act of 2017 was chapter 5, right of persons with mental illness. What change was brought in was from the 1987 Act, which had just one section, chapter 8 on mental illness. It elaborated to 11 rights to people with mental illness. That is, right to access mental health care, right to equality and non-discrimination, right to confidentiality, restriction on release of information in respect of mental illness, right to legal aid, to community living, to person contacts and communication, to access medical records, right to information, right to protection from cruel, inhuman and degrading treatment, to complain about deficiencies in services. And there was another introduction to the new act, Mental Health Review Board. In addition to professionals and members of the judiciary, there has to be 2 members who are persons with mental illness or caregivers, or persons representing organizations of persons with mental illness or caregivers, or non-governmental organizations working in the field of mental health. So all this, that is Advanced Directive, nominated representative, Mental Health Review Board composition, all this has led to a patient-centric ideology of Mental Health Care Act of 2017. So this act mainly focuses on, gives importance to patient autonomy. So how does patient autonomy impact the patient? His or her views are better heard, opinions are respected. He or she feels well informed. They get empowered to make their own decisions. He or she gets benefit of principles of medical ethics. These are autonomy, justice, beneficence and non-maleficence. So what might be the problems or negative aspects of giving autonomy to the patient? A highly rights-oriented patient may resist admission and primacy of immediate express wish of autonomy can cause potential problems for the patient's recovery. So what are the impacts of patient's autonomy on the practitioner? There's a shift from the paternalistic way of practice, which was practiced previously. There's a better therapeutic relationship between the patient and the practitioner. but the practitioner gets safeguarded from potential litigations. There's a uniformity in practice, but it's posing challenges for the practitioner to get accustomed to it. So what are the impacts of patient autonomy on the family? This act is overloaded with right-based practices and ignores a family system. There's a shift from family-oriented caregiving. Families may have to bear the financial burden even when they do not take part in the decision-making. Sometimes it may even render the family helpless and increase a caregiver burden. The emotional value of the family has been totally neglected. Now moving on to decision-making capacity and capacity evaluation, which has been dealt in Chapter 2 and Section 4. How can we conceptualize the model for decision-making capacity? The ability to understand about one's condition generally, to appreciate how it applies to one's situation specifically, to give reason with information that is risk versus benefit, and to express choices clearly. So capable patients are able to give informed consent to treatment, and informed consent is based on the principle of autonomy. That is, respect for the person requires respecting their informed decisions, and the principle of beneficence and non-maleficence. That is, an informed patient is a good judge of what sort of treatment is in his or her best interest. In Mental Health Care Act, capacity evaluation is needed in the following situation. That is, an advance directive, nominated representative, admission, treatment and discharge, making treatment decisions and regarding research. So decision-making capacity determines whether a patient can participate in his or her care or not. Cognitive domains necessary for informed decision-making are memory, language, executive function, which include planning, sequencing and organizing. And cognitive deficits can predict impairment in decision-making capacity more than affective and psychotic symptoms. So cognitive assessment is needed to assess whether a person has decision-making capacity. So in the context of Mental Health Care Act of 2017, it's not just this decision-making capacity alone which has to be considered, but many more aspects of capacity have to be considered, which raises yet another question. Should we have a separate capacity-based law? Now moving on to another section, section 115, which decriminalizes suicide. This is going to create a major impact in the coming years. This general ambivalence and ignorance in the society about suicide. Studies have shown that 70% of the suicide attempters at the time of attempt suffer from psychiatric illness. So decriminalization of suicide will lead to them openly seeking help. But there's a need to relook and repeal the 309 Indian Penal Code. There's a need to assess and treat persons with mental illness. Moving on to section 95 and 96, which deals with practices which have been banned. That is, ECT without anesthesia, psychosurgery and chaining. The Act only mentions sections which has been banned, but did not mention neuroscience-based new treatment procedures or provisions for the care of persons with mental illness. And regarding the benefit of ECT for needy minors is not considered by the Mental Health Care Act. Section 97 deals with seclusion. Seclusion has been banned and restraint has been accepted, but studies have shown that seclusion is a better procedure than restraint for behavioral management. So what is the future? We have to give more importance to family system and cultural diversity of India. We need to strengthen aftercare and community-based rehabilitation. There's a need to make amendments considering the major criticisms which have been made. There's further clarity needed in areas like capacity evaluation. Thank you. And these are my references.
We had excellent 4 presentations, and from the whole 4 sessions, papers, I understand that we are trying to bridge between the neurosciences, mental health, behavior, judiciary, and perhaps parliamentarians. And the law comes from the parliamentarians, and the judiciary has only a limited power in that way in law making. They can interpret the law. In the presentation, most of them from Dr. Anil and Indu were referring about the perpetrators. Nothing is being done for them. Unfortunately, I was a juvenile board member of our state, Kerala state, 25 years back. At that time, getting a stimulation from the book Bitter Chocolate, written by Pinky Virani, we did a lot of social surveys, and the board presented the whole thing to those days Chief Minister and Chief Justice and everybody. But the answer was a very dignified silence. So I fully realize that unless or until we catch the parliamentarians, psycho-educate them, carry the crux of the neuroscience to these parliamentarians, things may not improve. But on the other hand, I believe the population in a democratic country will get the benefit what they ask for. And here in Indian democracy, we are heading slowly towards progress, but it will come to a better state. That's what I anticipate. From the presentation, I have a general question. Anyone can think about it. And see, this type of presentations are being done in the Indian psychiatric societies. Don't you think that we have to take the crux of the neuroscience and behavior science and things to the upper level, to the parliamentarians, unless or until we address them directly or indirectly? Will it be possible to bring out the change as we desire? That's my only question. And I request my co-chairperson to conduct the rest of the procedure.
Thank you very much. As said, our co-chair has said, I definitely agree. The progress and development of the behavioral science understanding, how it should be contemplated in the law, that is predominantly or mostly has been guided till now in the Indian context by the development on the global front, like all the conventions. They start the process of change in legislations. The thing is that those persons who are dealing with the behavioral science in the forefront, they should start advocacy and start focusing. I think one area, particularly the suicide 309, that was the area I think which has been a fruitful development that was predominantly driven by the inner demands from the professional circle. And 377, these two recently has been that. But the most of the time, it has been by the development of the global nature. So that is the one thing which I'd say. But one act, like NDPS Act, it has given the provisions which is in sync with the current understanding. But the implementation of that provision is very, very minimal and decimal. So the professionals also has to train whatever law has given us to spread that, to train the person who are responsible for implementation. Like in Bihar state, I belong to that state, we have started training of the all police personnel in the state, zone-wise, on these aspects of NDPS Act, and we are in the process of developing a SOP. What should be the response pattern when a person with a small quantity is caught by a police person or in the... So these kind of things, activities needs to be taken up by the professionals also, so that the law benefit can be reached to the ground level. So this was, otherwise all the presentations were really very good. And Yes, sir. So now I would like to open it up for questions and discussions. Yes.
Raju?
No, nothing much, but you think the caption of the topic is a bit misleading? Caption of the topic is a bit misleading, do you think so?
Present and
Maybe one of the presenters can answer this question. The topic is
neuroscience.
Behavior science, informing law.
why it is the presentations we have done. It's a presentation. I'm not saying that they're not related. We thought the presentations appeared to be more pure. The rest appeared to be pure presentation of Juvenile Act, pure presentation of Mental Health Act, pure presentation of. Okay.
These things should inform law.
Okay.
So they were talking about how the lawmakers were informed.
Okay.
Other neuroscience, and the last night I repeated, neuroscience is not the only way by which the law should be set. Because even for antisocials, there are neural circuitry well established. But in law, not only the neuroscience, other things also.
No, my question was that I wish this or link it somewhere there. That's the only thing. Yeah. That is the only thing. Yeah.
Sir, it's regarding the question is regarding the juvenile offenders. Actually, I fully agree with the optimism shown by the myelination process and probably synaptic pruning and later change in the person. But we should not forget about the determinism which is offered by the genetics. And we know that already adoption studies have shown that antisocial personality, the offsprings of antisocial personality disorders, when reared by the normal parents, again the antisocial behavior will be there. So this determinism offered by the genetics, which we are not able to change, is it the darker side of the optimism expressed by you?
Definitely, we cannot make everyone Mother Teresa and Jesus Christ. But not even N. Raju. Oh, sorry, not even N. Raju. People are different. There is a limit. But when the law is made to punish them, take it from neuroscience that juvenile people are in the process of development. Even antisocial, given good climate, definitely will change. They will not become N. Raju, but they are in the process of changing. And 18 is an arbitrary thing. The hot cognition made by the Supreme Court the other day is to hang them when their advocate said at the time of commission of the act, he did not reach 18. But the Supreme Court, all said and done, said hang them. Is it not an amygdala hijacking by the 64-year-old Supreme Court judge? That's the thing we have to think aloud. And we should give a proper environment, because that is a pressure. Nelson Mandela said, and even Gandhi said, I didn't quote him, this is a time when they should be given the optimal environment to grow. At 14, they are put in a prison. The environment is totally damaging, and you can make antisocial out of N. Raju if they are put in jail. That was the thing. That is why juvenile justice system has come, whereby they are not put in jails. As far as possible, they are sent home. And if there is no home only, the problem comes. In Western countries, they give, the state gives more enriching environment. But in our situation, miles to go before we create such a thing. So the neuroscience is telling that the right environment, given in a developing brain, the brain under construction, must be the treatment of choice, rather than a punishment and putting them in a hostile, antisocial environment, which is not in tune.
I congratulate all the speakers, Dr. Anil, Indu and all of them. Of course, they also looked at biology and the legal aspects of most of the acts. I think over time even our laws are also looking, for example, RPWD Act. It also looks at prevention of disabilities. And our new Mental Health Care Act. There's a separate chapter which says all legal enforcing authorities should be trained in Mental Health Act. And that is a first step. Huh? Yeah, periodic training. So it insists on that. All these things issued, there is some advancement where these laws are going close to the community. In that way, probably, of course, I think as we are implementing most of these laws, I would like to say some of the interesting things which we came across. For example, in Domestic Violence Act in Bangalore, we had an association where they called themselves husbands who are harassed by domestic violence. There was an organization. Of course, they made a representation in the Honorable High Court of Karnataka. And as far as this POCSO Act, that is mandatory. I think every psychiatrist has to mandatorily inform the police after it's been a specific 24 hours. Time is not mentioned, some specific time it is there. So one girl, I think one of the very senior psychiatrists, she came and told him that she was sexually harassed. Then he reported it to the police. And then, of course, she had to inform. She was a 13-year-old girl, slightly educated girl. And, of course, she had to report to the police, report to other authorities. Ultimately, she did not come back to the psychiatrist. But she sent him a WhatsApp message, says that, I came to you to forget a nightmare. I just wanted to forget it, but you made me tell it at 13 instances to different people. Every time I re-expense, you in fact, you worsened my situation. These are some of the awkward moments we come across when we implement these laws. And in our institution, we also made one dissertation. Of course, it was under forensic medicine. We actually assessed all the people who came with sexual, I think the perpetrators of this POCSO Act also, that study also we did. And of course, that was many interesting findings. But the thing was, most of them were in the prison. So there was some problem with validity, getting the ethics committee approval, research in this area is very difficult. Yeah, sir, I think I conclude. I think that's all. I have no comment. Yeah.
In the initial part of the presentation, sir told that most of the POCSO offenders may be suffering from an ICD-11 or a DSM-5 diagnosis. Are we at a state to say such a statement? Because this may actually can help the perpetrators can get away with from the court, because we know the child.
You want to give some input? Sorry to interrupt.
No,
because that can be discussed after, because the time is. If you have a specific question.
No, the question is, are we at a state to call that the POCSO offenders, the person who are actually accused of a POCSO crime? Most of them may have, sir told like most of them may have a diagnosis of pedophilia. Are we at a state to say?
So,
actually the neuroscience is not taken up by the judiciary. Can we?
okay, thank you very much for such an enriching discussion. And with this, we'll have felicitation, and after that, we'll end the session. So we'd like to call the presenters. One by one. We'd like to call the presenters to collect the certificate. One.
All the four may come, please.
Please.
We will have a photograph. Raju sir, take our photo. Come.